Blonde is a film that came out recently, 2022, on Netflix and is directed by Andrew Dominik and stars Ana de Armas as Marilyn Monroe. I've only seen 2 previous films from Andrew Dominik, one of those being Chopper, which we've talked about on the podcast, I believe in our 2nd episode, possibly our 3rd, I don't remember. I enjoyed that movie overall, and I thought that it was a decent film that was low budget and centered around a real-life criminal figure. And the other film is Killing Them Softly, which I didn't enjoy overall. I liked the look of the movie, but I thought that the story and the writing had a lot of issues. Andrew Dominik's not a director I'm super familiar with, so going into this I really didn't have too many expectations. I was intrigued by the fact that this film has been rated NC-17. There aren't that many films that are given that rating, especially nowadays, and it's sort of become a status of its own. I think that's a big reason why a lot of people are wanting to see this film, is because of that rating. I think curiosity is a big driving factor in why a lot of people want to see this film and why they want to view this film. And this is the first film that's been rated NC-17 to go directly to a streaming service. Before I get into what I think of this film, I want to give my impressions about what I thought of the NC-17 rating and whether or not I thought it was justified. I really don't think that this film needed to be rated NC-17. There is a lot of nudity in this film, and there are a lot of scenes involving sexual assault, and they're shot in a very gratuitous manner. However, I would argue that there are R-rated films that I would consider to be more graphic in its depictions than this movie. The film I Saw the Devil is rife with all sorts of violent acts and gruesome imagery, but that is rated R, at least in the US, I believe. I don't know what the South Korean rating system is. But nevertheless, I really didn't think that this rating was justified. I really do think that part of it was used to sort of market the film in a way, kind of generate some buzz for it and get audiences intrigued into what this film is about ultimately. So what did I think of this film? I don't think it was very good. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, so don't worry, I won't give anything away that happens in the film. I won't give any plot details that would ruin the experience. I just want to give my thoughts on it overall. First off, the cinematography at times is stunning. It is gorgeous in so many different moments throughout. There are shots in this film that left me wondering how exactly it was made and really made me curious about the actual filmmaking process of this movie. I think that a lot of the black and white shots, while thematically inconsistent, looked really good, and I thought that they really did a good job of recreating a lot of the aesthetics of what Marilyn Monroe's movies looked like. There are editing choices in this movie that make the cinematography really unique and stand out quite a bit. There are moments that feel surreal, they feel like you're in a dream. A lot of this felt pretty nightmarish, and visually I thought it was really effective overall. There are a few scenes that I don't think worked quite as well as others, but I don't think it really took away from the experience from a visual standpoint. Another aspect of this film that I thought was a positive was Ana de Armas' performance. I thought she did a good job emotionally portraying the character. A lot of people have been giving her criticism because she was unable to lose her Cuban accent for this film, even though Marilyn Monroe was born and raised in America. But I don't think it was too much of an issue for me, and it didn't take me out of the movie. Of all the issues I have with this film, her accent definitely was not one of them. Speaking of the issues, I want to touch on what I had criticisms for this movie. This movie is structured in a very repetitive manner. A good majority of this movie is watching Marilyn Monroe as a character go through these events and suffering in all of these miserable scenarios. It's almost as if you're watching some kind of exploitation film in a way. The majority of the scenes in this movie is just watching Marilyn Monroe go through some kind of traumatic event, or watching Ana de Armas cry because of some kind of emotional trauma that she's going over. This movie's getting a lot of criticism because of the way that it portrays Marilyn Monroe and how a lot of what happens in this movie is fictionalized. This movie is not a true-to-life biographical film. It is very much a fictionalized film that's based off of a novel written by Joyce Carol Oates. So going into it, I knew that this wasn't going to be a true-to-life depiction of what Marilyn Monroe was like, but that isn't to say that there aren't positive ways of portraying a fictionalized version of a real-life figure in your film. Whereas Andrew Dominik deliberately chose to only show the really graphic and really bleak parts of what he wanted to get across in this film. It's a very miserable, almost hopeless movie for the majority of it, and after 3 hours of experiencing that, I can't help but feel like I didn't get anything of value from watching this. I feel like the way that Andrew Dominik told this story and the way that he portrayed Marilyn Monroe in this film, it really didn't feel like he had a clear goal in mind of where he wanted this movie to go and what he wanted this movie to be about, and therefore the movie suffers quite a bit, feeling way too bogged down by all of these scenes depicting this emotional trauma and scenes of Ana de Armas crying, and because of that I feel as if I was very detached from what was happening in the film. Marilyn Monroe in this movie really didn't feel like a character. She just felt like some sort of vessel that was an excuse for Andrew Dominik to depict these horrible situations through. And it is interesting how a lot of people are saying that this is very disrespectful to Marilyn Monroe and how it sort of tarnishes her legacy in a way, because people are going to view this movie and only see the hyper-fictionalized negative aspects of her life that Andrew Dominik has chosen to portray in it. And part of me definitely agrees with that sentiment. I think that because he only chose to show the negative parts, this film, for most of it, doesn't feel like it has a point. A lot of the dialogue I thought was really weak. I thought it was very repetitive, much like the structure of this film. The amount of times Ana de Armas says the word daddy in this film made me want to commit defenestration. Look that word up. Most of the time when Marilyn Monroe isn't being traumatized or emotionally abused or sexually assaulted in this film, a lot of the dialogue from Ana de Armas is spent talking about her ambitions and her goals and her dreams, but you never really get a clear sense of what her dreams and goals and ambitions are, which makes her feel even less of a character than what we've already been experiencing in the scenes where she is being abused and emotionally tortured. We never get a clear sense of who she is, and because of that, the dialogue feels like it's going nowhere when she's talking about what she ultimately wants as a person, what she ultimately wants as a character. It really doesn't feel like she has any agency throughout this thing. It really does feel like she's just a prop for the audience to watch be assaulted and be tortured. The pacing of this movie is bogged down not only because of the structure, but because of the runtime. After an hour of this film, you really feel it start to drag, and it feels like a lot happens in this movie, but at the same time, it also feels like nothing happens. It's paced at such a crawl, and the fact that there really isn't that much music throughout it doesn't help it at all, and the music that is included is very drony and very slow paced. One kind of positive I do want to touch on, I did like Adrian Brody's acting. I thought it was subtle enough, and I thought his inclusion gave a little bit of levity to a very bleak and drawn out movie. So overall, I think he did a good job. There were some weird editing choices in terms of what they chose to use special effects for and how they went about it. For example, not getting into spoilers, but there's a scene where she's amongst a crowd, and the crowd almost looks like they have a Snapchat filter over their faces with really big mouths and really distorted eyes, and it's all in slow motion. And it feels very cheap for a movie that otherwise seems like it has decent production value. And there are little moments and editing tricks like that that I feel really contributed to making this movie feel messy and unorganized. I want to wrap this up, but before I do, I want to touch on the concept of misery porn for a second. A lot of people are using that term to describe this film and to criticize it for the subject matter that is portrayed throughout, especially concerning the fact that Marilyn Monroe was a real figure and a real person that lived and breathed and had her own emotions and thoughts and feelings that you don't really get in a film like this. I really do feel as if this movie falls under the category of misery porn, in that this movie really doesn't have much substance other than the audience watching Marilyn Monroe go through all these awful things. And when a movie is made in such a manner and the goal of it is to just make the audience feel bad by putting them through all these emotionally draining scenes of sexual assault assault and Ana de Armas crying and drug abuse and domestic abuse and all these different things, it really leaves little room for the audience to find a reason to care about what's happening if what the entirety of the film is so bleak and hopeless. I want to compare this movie to a film I saw recently called Threads. Threads is a film about nuclear fallout in Britain that was released in 1984, I believe. It is a straight-to-TV BBC film that aired in the UK and became so popular that they actually aired it in the US for a bit of time. The subject matter of that movie is incredibly bleak and very hopeless, and what happens throughout the movie is really disheartening and leaves you feeling empty by the end of the film. I really do think that the biggest difference between a film like Threads and a film like Blonde is that an audience going into a film like Threads sort of already knows what they're getting into with the concept of a nuclear fallout and it being depicted in a very realistic and graphic way. The characters are miserable and the characters are going through a situation that feels incredibly hopeless and incredibly bleak, but it never feels purposeless throughout the movie. A lot of the appeal of Threads is to simply observe what is happening almost in an objective way and kind of view it as a what-if scenario. The film does have emotional beats and it does have characters that you could easily become attached to, but at the same time, the majority of the goal of the film is to try to portray a nuclear fallout and the consequences of that in an accurate and effective way. Whereas a film like Blonde feels really gratuitous in how it portrays the trauma of Marilyn Monroe, especially considering that Marilyn Monroe was a real-life figure. And I don't even think that there's anything inherently wrong with fictionalizing a real person's life in a way that would be interesting or entertaining, but because this movie is so bleak for seemingly no reason at all, unlike Threads, it's really hard to attach yourself to something like this, where you're supposed to feel sympathy for a character when really the movie is just almost putting you through the ringer, in that it seems like it's pointing and laughing at you while it's portraying these events in a gratuitous way. It doesn't feel like there's a through line with this, unlike Threads, and I really do think that the differences between these two films falls down to the overall goals of each film. I do think that Threads does meet that goal, whereas Blonde doesn't seem like it has any goal at all, other than to make the audience feel like shit with what they're watching. Wrapping up my thoughts, I thought that this was a very long-winded, very purposeless, almost insulting film to watch, I would say. And part of me doesn't want to use that word, but I really can't think of any other way to describe the feeling I have when thinking about the goals that Andrew Dominik had when keeping an audience in mind for this film. I enjoyed Ana de Armas' performance despite the accent. I thought that she played the character emotionally well, and I did like a lot of what they went for cinematically with this film. But aside from those few positives, I really do think that this is a film that overall doesn't have the best interest of its audience in mind and is gratuitous for the sake of being gratuitous and is just a horribly structured mess. I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Bye.